Thank you, Tanya, for the introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. As Tanya mentioned, my name is Scott Spurgeon, and I'm presenting today with my co-PI, Charlene Sylvester. And she also mentioned that this is a FY24 new start, and we're aiming to create a new framework for understanding coastal elevation change. And like the slide says here, we are really working on baby steps, and I believe that we'll make some pretty good steps these next couple of years. Before we get into the project itself, I want to introduce you to our team. We're anticipating the addition of an ORISE fellow on the right side here, but Charlene and I, as well as Sam Jackson from the Environmental Laboratory and our newest research physical scientist of the Coastal Engineering Branch, Brooke Walker, we make up a multidisciplinary cross-lab research team, and we're planning to expand the team with members from EAL, CHL, and elsewhere as the project evolves in years 2 and 3. And the ORISE fellow that we aim to have start next year will have half-time support shared with another CIRP hazardous inlet shoals team that is headed up by Justin Schaller. Getting into a little bit of the background of this project, it is, again, an FY24 new start under CIRP in response to statements of need calling for advanced spatio-temporal sediment volume change analysis tools that have the potential to promote efficiencies in the sediment budget development process. So the current spatial framework here is seen on the right side. It is based off of DEMs of difference. And so these DEMs of difference use a series of fixed transect bins to develop and report volume change calculations. And the transect bin there that's highlighted illustrates the kind of on-offshore extent of volume change calculations for this example, which is in New York. And it's limited to the area from the mean high water shoreline contour to the first line of infrastructure, which in that case is the coastal road there. And so we see that the main limitations of this methodology are really truly around the transect bins that are fixed. So modification of those transect bins might be required in certain cases to capture overwash deposits or other phenomena associated with barrier island rollover, or to exclude storm debris piles. And so not only do the modification of these transect bins take a lot of time and labor, but they also make volumes computed over several distinct periods in time to be difficult to compare one with another. And so with that comparison being more difficult, it's also then more difficult to use to inform a broader understanding of coastal change because these bins are changing. And then lastly, on this slide, we mentioned that while this movement of sediment can be inferred from the DEM of difference, the transport direction of sediment is not actually truly currently captured by these DEMs of difference. Looking at our kind of project roadmap, I'm going to not spend a ton of time here, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what we're looking at for FY24 with the lit review, the ORISE fellow, which we mentioned, and data compilation, and then finally tech transfer. That's all this year with lots of other deliverables in yellow coming in the next couple of years, as well as looking at volume partitioning, hotspot analysis, bias assessments, and all that great stuff that I'll let Charlene cover in the next few slides once I wrap up FY24. So the project roadmap shares a major focus areas we'll address over the life cycle of this project. And obviously we know that this FY we started late given delays in appropriations. And so that is where the ORISE fellow comes in terms of being able to really get a lot of things off the ground early FY25. But for this year, we have started work primarily with a literature review. The literature review is in progress. It's seen there on the right with a focus on multi-temporal change detection in the coastal zone. Pilot sites for this study are being compiled with data inventories built for each area of interest to assess fitness for use. And we've already recorded some field insights from our feedback form, and that's seen on the right side there, far right side. And so we have a greater understanding of how volumes are currently being developed, but that form will come up a little bit later in this presentation because we do want to get additional feedback as much as possible. So we've also published that ORISE Fellowship advertisement that's currently accepting applications. And so we will also talk about that a little bit later. And then tech transfer, which is this presentation, and continued coordination with team members, PDT, and program management. Looking at the literature review in particular, it's aiming to determine the state of the art really as it relates to multi-temporal coastal change detection. And we've sourced over 70 pieces of literature so far that have been very insightful thus far in the state of the art and really the historical changes that have occurred as technology has developed and as we have continued to see additional types of data like LiDAR come into frame. And so topics include a background to change detection on the whole, and then a walk through kind of the various methods going from the most simple shoreline position approach to kind of more complex modern methods like the space-time cube analysis. And as this project will focus on errors and uncertainties as well, that is a very important part of volume change calculations. We're also paying very close attention to how these errors and uncertainties are being listed in the published literature. And so we're very excited about this literature review as it is about to wrap up. And so getting into a little bit of this compilation, one of the kind of products that we've tried to develop is try to be as organized as possible with our sourcing literature. And so on the right side here, you see a spreadsheet that we've built as we've inventoried our literature. And so this approach allows us to sort and filter the literature by any of our tracked fields that you see there. It allows us to quickly pull out key quotes from the literature that we've sourced, and then color code pieces of literature based on their usage in the end report. And so if you're curious about the literature that we have sourced, you can actually scan that QR code and it takes you to that spreadsheet, and you can scroll through all the different 73 papers or 72 papers that we've sourced, and you're able to kind of see the work that's already been done. And how we've developed that literature review. So at this point, I'll hand things over to Charlene to talk about the data inventory and then the remaining tasking in the next few years.
Great, thank you, Scott. Hopefully I have remembered to take myself off mute because I always forget that aspect of things. And just to, I guess, circle back super quick on the literature review, if you happen to take the time to look at that spreadsheet and you feel that there's a key piece of literature perhaps missing, we would certainly welcome you bringing that to our attention via email message or Teams message, however you want to do it. I think we still the literature review is in draft form, but I still think we have flexibility to add to it. So yes, so please, by all means, send any literature recommendations that you might have. But pivoting to the data inventory, as Scott mentioned, this was another major component of the work that we were actually able to accomplish this FY despite a late start. So with the data inventory, we identified a number of pilot areas through our PDT kickoff meeting, where we wanted to look at coastal areas that had the data coverage that might be sufficient to meet the research objectives under this project. And so by sufficient data coverage, we're really talking about data requirements that would support a spatial resolution of perhaps minimally 3 meters, ideally 1 meter, but we realize we're probably going to have to use the entire temporal temporal inventory of data sets that might be available. And some of these data sets are really old, maybe dating back to say 1996 or something. So we realize that some of those earlier data sets may not support that 1 meter DEM resolution. So we're sort of saying 3 meters at minimum. We also, again, going into the temporal aspect of things, we're looking for data sets from at least 10 temporally unique time periods, and that's really to support concepts like hotspot analysis. And then of course the data sets must have at least adequate geospatial metadata so that we can perform any datum transformations that are required to kind of bring data sets in alignment with one another. What you're looking at on the screen is the U.S. Interagency Elevation Inventory polygons. These are from August 2024. They are colored by the collection year associated with the data sets. And polygons that you see, in yellow are certainly newer. So this is the data set age, sort of like most recent available for different areas in the lower 48. So again, yellow colors are sort of data sets that are, say, less than 3 years old. Data sets in orange are going to be data sets that are between, say, 4 and 8 years old. And then data sets that are in the pink colors, there's not too many there areas, they would be data sets that might be 9 years or older data sets. So that kind of lets the team know when we're kind of sourcing data sets for our inventories, something about sort of the age of the data that we might expect there. And then if we go to the next slide, Scott, we have another kind of representation of these interagency elevation inventory polygons shown here as a tessellated grid using hex bins that are 5,000 square kilometers in area. And here we've just done a spatial join of that tessellation grid with those interagency elevation inventory polygons to color the hex bins by the number of dataset polygons that might intersect a given hex bin. So we certainly see from various coastal areas in the lower 48, we have areas with lots of data sets that are potentially available for our team to use. For example, the coast of North Carolina, we know has a lot of data sets to use, where the team might want to steer clear of a place like northern Maine. It's a rocky coast up there anyways, but there's just not a lot of data sets there to use. So we're using representations or visualizations, like this to help sort of support the defining of these pilot areas, which I think we go into in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. And so with these pilot areas, there's a number of, I guess, considerations. So of course, data set age is sort of just that number of temporally unique data sets that's available. So one of the areas that we knew immediately that we wanted to use as a pilot area was the Mississippi, Alabama barrier islands. This is actually an area, that we know JaBLTEX has surveyed dozens of times, or what seems like dozens of times. But so we know there's it's a data rich kind of, environment. There's also a lot of overlap with existing ongoing projects. So for example, the MISCHIP project, and then there also is some alignment with other projects like the Mississippi Sediment Budget Update. That's a reimbursable project that Scott, in fact, is going to be leading in the next FY. And the other important consideration is that there's also existing volume change products for these areas, as well as advanced land cover and vegetation metrics. And the latter, those land cover and vegetation metrics products are developed by Sam Jackson on our team from the environmental lab. And really, the existence of other, data products really kind of allows us, I hope, to really fully realize this R&D and to actually be able to, make comparisons kind of between sort of existing methods for computing, say, volume changes and what new insights sort of these newer, more novel methods might be able to provide. And so that's the first pilot area. You can go to the next slide, Scott. We have a data inventory compiled for this area already. There's a bunch of data sets listed on that table, which will be hard to maybe read, on your screen, but we are in the data inventory, we're making note of important information, such as the beginning and the end date that's associated with the data set, where the data set, of course, comes from, what the data coverage is primarily. A lot of these data sets are topography only, especially the older ones. And then, of course, URLs for where we would download that data set, largely from Digital Coast. And also for that important, metadata, and then kind of any particular notes that we glean from looking kind of at the data coverage polygons. As Scott mentioned, Brooke Walker is brand new to our team as of this week, so she's going to be taking over the reins on the other pilot areas that I'll get to in just a second. But sort of the next steps in this is sort of to assess sort of the fitness of use of each of these data sets for our research objectives. So of course, there we're looking at the data coverage, both spatial and temporal. We are looking at, whether the data set can sort of meet those DEM requirements of 3 meters. We're looking at whether there might be some data processing, for example, a data transform that we have to do to sort of bring this data set in alignment with all of the other data sets available. And then we also want to have a look at the relative bias that might exist between these data sets. And so what you're, I guess, looking at there from Dauphin Island, I really like these data density plots. So this is just all of the DEM data from all the data sets at like a 4-meter pixel resolution, and we're essentially just sort of counting down the time stack of like how many of those cells have actual elevation values. So you see that in that heat map there, and it's really just an indicator of sort of data coverage. So we know we have, of course, most of the data coverage is going to be on land, so that's the burial, beach portion, and then we certainly understand that the data coverage below the water, or the bathymetry data coverage, will differ, data set to data set, and that's where some of that bias conversation comes into play later. So the next slide is our other two pilot areas that we have identified. So the first would be that area near Duck in North Carolina, which has a rich data history dating back to 1996, with a lot of overlap with existing work and projects. And then finally, an area of New Jersey, which actually came about during our initial PDT kickoff. Monica Chaston from Philadelphia District is like, well, if you're looking for areas, do the whole coast of New Jersey. So we've included that here. And an interesting, I think, aspect is, particularly when we look at New Jersey, for example, there's a lot of data sets there over time, say temporally. However, a lot of these data sets in New Jersey are just more piecemeal. So they're just like, little patches, of data. And I think that will be revealed in some of our kind of data inventory products that we'll hopefully be sharing with you all when we have those windows ready. And so I think there's considerations there for, as we move forward. And then the next slide, again, talking about kind of, that path forward. Scott touched upon this slide here. So we've shared, what we've done in FY24, which really was limited to the lit review, getting all the gears in order for the advertising of the ORISE Fellow, and then some of these more just data compilation tasks. So the actual R&D will be happening over the next 2 years. And this is kind of the team's vision that's shared here for FY25 and FY26. And so ideally what we would like to be able to do is kind of wanted to address this, I guess, question on 3 fronts, really. That being, can we take these volumes and partition them in some manner? And so, for example, can we look at a dune volume versus like the volume associated with the beach berm? That's just in a very, general sense. So with that work that will be led by Sam Jackson and myself, we'll be looking at leveraging work from other work units to actually do that sort of DEM segmentation work to be able to begin to partition those volumes. And then can we use that information alongside the existing land cover metrics and the dune vegetation, metrics to look at volumes in a new way. And then the sort of other major fork would be this hotspot analysis. We've done some preliminary work on Dauphin Island with looking at hotspot analysis, but the big questions there are what are the parameters that we might use to fill data voids in the data sets? So there would be voids temporally, sort of through that time stack of data, but also, spatially. So what are the parameters that we can use to fill the voids in these data sets and run the hotspot analysis? And then what impact does using different parameters have on the end result of that hotspot analysis? That's work that we think at this point Scott will be leading with support from others on the team. And then this question of bias. So when we've been doing our literature review, there are lots of researchers certainly acknowledging that bias or uncertainty might exist in volume measurements, and some have proposed methods or approaches for sort of calculating, that uncertainty. But by and large, just based on reading the literature, it seems like that uncertainty kind of question is ignored, for lack of a better word. And so we would like to be able to actually provide some sense of uncertainty with the volume. That would be a good goal, we think. We certainly are aware that with the existing volume change framework using transect bins and pixel summation on a DEM of difference, particularly when we're looking at volumes offshore or in the bathymetry, that's going to be heavily influenced, right, by your data coverage. And so some products that we hope to produce in FY24 would sort of be our workflows for constructing the space-time cubes that will support our, hotspot analysis, and then the products coming out of our volume partitioning, our DEM segmentation as well. And so those are kind of the three main forks for this R&D. And then, of course, FY26, we're perhaps getting very far ahead of ourselves, but ideally, based on work we do in FY25 and feedback received from the field and other researchers, hopefully we'll be able to refine any methods that we develop in FY25 and be able to work towards workflows that the field could either sort of work themselves or products that would have meaning and be useful for the field. And then, of course, the ultimate goal of expanding these products for additional pilot sites or areas. So if we look at the next slide, I won't belabor everything all over again, but here we've kind of listed out those anticipated products and milestones moving into FY25 and FY26. I would say FY26 is certainly more fuzzy at this stage of the game. So what you see there, please take in consideration that we are just getting started, and a lot will be dependent on what we're actually what we accomplish in FY25. If we go to the next slide, I wanted to touch upon some of, I guess, the feedback that we received during our initial kickoff call and our PDP meeting. We certainly, understand that volumes in the field, are critical for all of the various mission areas that the Corps of Engineers, support. So whether for navigation, volumes are being used for dredge material management plans, for planning, budget beneficial use, for sort of sediment budget analysis, and determining, where you might place, sediment. For coastal storm, risk management, those volumes are being used to sort of guarantee or understand the longevity, of beaches, the health of those beaches, tracking any, erosional hotspots. And so sediment budgets sort of come up, all over the place. So we're eager to see if we can kind of take this concept of partition volumes and get those fed in a meaningful way into the sediment budget development process. And then for ecosystem restoration, there's a question of what marsh areas are eroding and accreting, and then finally for emergency response, that's kind of a time period when we're really tasked with computing volumes. That's when things can get really challenging with having to define transect bins for the whole entire region at 2 a.m. in the morning. And so we think we can develop a framework that would allow us to really just append kind of the newest data to a stack of data and say rerun a hotspot analysis and get some meaningful information from that. And then finally, I think where we're wrapping up quickly is sort of some of the challenges that folks have shared with us. Since the next slide, I think, Scott. Yeah, with the existing tools. So folks acknowledged that there's a variety of methods and approaches and tools for calculating volumes with little, consistency among them, and challenges with being able to recreate or reproduce results from volume computations. A lot of the existing tools, for example, are in fact geared towards, LiDAR or other sort of more dense data sets, but in some places, maybe they don't have LiDAR, or they want to compute, volumes, with their beach profiles or profiles, that go offshore. I think there are some work units that are actively kind of addressing, that need there. And then it's kind of that ability to be able to compare volumes that you might calculate for distinct, temporal time periods, and then, be able to understand or have a better, broader understanding, of what that means for the changes that you're seeing on your shoreline, so that you can better inform your decision making related to coastal projects. And then finally, we wanted to leave you with links that Scott will share in the chat for our feedback form. So there, if as you've been listening and you have questions or thoughts, that feedback form is certainly an opportunity to provide feedback to the team, all of which would be valuable. So we certainly appreciate you doing that. It's just an ArcGIS Survey 123 form. It's public data collection. Just know that you don't have to put your name there, but you certainly can. And there's no login required there. And then finally, we did want to share, I guess, the advertisement for this ORISE fellowship. We are kind of looking for a postdoctoral, postmaster's, or current doctoral student to support some of the tasks in this work unit. And again, that would be supported half-time alongside Dr. Justin Schaller's Hazardous Inlet Shoals project as well. And I know that was quick, but that's, I think, what we had to share today, but we are happy to take questions and have further discussion on what we've shared. So thank you for joining and listening.